Welcome to the deep dive. We're about to unpack a really unique set of sources you've shared with us. These are excerpts from a text called From Misery to Enlightenment.
Yeah, and this isn't your typical kind of philosophical text. It really jumps around, doesn't it? You get these very personal stories mixed with pretty sharp insights and some, well, quite provocative social commentary.
Exactly. So our mission here in this deep dive is really to navigate all this material you've given us, pull out what seem like the most potent knowledge nuggets, and maybe find those surprising facts or perspectives that make you stop and think.
And it feels like we're listening to a single voice, right? Sharing this very distinct perspective on, well, everything, life, truth, society, that inner journey. And the lessons seem to come from all over the place.
They really do, from challenging childhood moments right through to grappling with huge questions about consciousness, reality itself.
It covers so much ground. Family stuff, critiques of religion, politics. It's all in there.
So let's dive into the material you've provided and see what insights start to emerge. Where should we begin?
Well, let's start right at the beginning with those early life anecdotes. The source really highlights this tension, doesn't it, between a child's sort of natural potential and what the parents expect. And it frames it quite starkly, parents protecting their own investment.
Their investment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not necessarily what's best for the child's unique path.
Exactly.
And there's that really vivid image right away passing through the father's shop. The speaker talks about walking through it with eyes closed. What was the reaction to that?
The father was confused, apparently called it a strange ritual, but the speaker's response, wow, it was loaded. Something like, don't be afraid of me. I am no one's competitor.
So not just a kid being weird.
No, it feels symbolic, like a clear refusal to be pulled into the family business, which the father clearly wanted, emphasizing that tradition of inheritance.
Right, and the source mentions the father pushing for the business, saying things like, even if you become a doctor, you cannot earn as much. That pressure was intense.
Pressure to conform, business, doctor, engineer the preset paths.
And that spirit of defiance, it shows up elsewhere too. What about that story with the chic dress? The family was against it.
Yeah, really against it. They wanted traditional Indian clothes, but the speaker just kept wearing it right through school.
And apparently it actually helped, gained respect, even from officials.
That's what the source says, mistaken for someone important. And there's that line you pointed out, the harder they tried, the more. It just seemed to solidify that independence. Opposition fueled it.
Absolutely. And this pattern, it seems to continue right into college. The story of being expelled for being right.
Yeah, not feeling shame, but pride. Saying the principal lacked guts.
That's quite something. And then making that prediction, almost. Telling the principal, today you have power, tomorrow maybe I will.
And the source claims it actually happened. Years later, the principal comes looking for a job.
No way.
Yes. And the only qualification brought up was that expulsion, being expelled for being right. It's an incredible turnaround, if true.
Wow. And there's another defiance story too, right? Tearing up orders on the hostel board.
The superintendent's orders. And the justification wasn't just rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was, he issues stupid orders. Now, I am not so stupid as to put those orders on the board.
So it raises that question, doesn't it?
Oh.
When do you actively challenge a rule you see as just plain wrong or, well, stupid?
Yeah, it's a recurring theme. Okay, so moving on from that early defiance, the sources then really delve into understanding different internal states, how we perceive things, starting with hearing versus listening.
Ah, yes. It makes a clear distinction there. Hearing is just mechanical. Sound waves hitting the ear.
Right, anyone with working ears does that. But listening, the source says, is a far higher stage. There's something more involved.
What is that? Something more? Presence? Attention?
It seems to be about presence, yeah. An inner quiet that lets you really receive not just the sound, but maybe the meaning, the reality behind it. Your whole being is engaged, not just your ears.
And there's that anecdote used to illustrate focus from the man so lost in concentration he misses breakfast.
Yeah, he didn't hear his wife, didn't see the food, and his friend just ate it. It shows the power of concentration, narrowing your consciousness right down.
Like a laser beam.
Exactly. The source says it makes the mind powerful, like a sword, to cut through secrets. But it's careful to point out this kind of concentration isn't religion.
Right. And that story about the king of Varanasi having surgery in 1920, without anesthesia, just by reading the Gita. That's presented as an example of this intense mind power through concentration.
This is an incredible claim. Or the other example, the man absorbed in theory who just stood out in the snow all night, completely oblivious.
Okay, so that's concentration narrowing the focus. But the source defines meditation differently. It says it's not concentration, so what is it?
This is where it gets really interesting. The source offers its own definition. It's not narrowing like concentration, and it's not even broadening like contemplation. It's exactly in the middle.
In middle.
The core idea seems to be just being, simply existing, without trying to do anything, dropping the effort.
So the state itself is the goal, not achieving the state through some action.
Precisely. That story about the three men looking at the monk on the hill illustrates it perfectly. One guy says he's doing nothing. Another says no, he's contemplating. But the third one gets it. He's just being, utterly relaxed at his center.
Okay. And the source describes a two-part process for this.
Yeah. First, you learn how just to be, finding that still center point. Then you learn to bring that stillness into your actions, cleaning the floor, talking, doing everyday things, but that inner center stays completely undisturbed. There's that evocative phrase about speaking while the center is silent, utterly silent.
Active presence. That's a powerful image. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Relationships, love, instinct. The source explores these too, sometimes tenderly, sometimes quite critically.
Very much so. That story about Nana's death and Nani wanting to die too, it's very moving. And the way the speaker interacts with her sort of challenges her playfully, giving her a reason for him to choose life. It shows this strange mix of deep grief and, well, human connection, even negotiation.
It does. And that small detail about the mother's lasting pain because Nana didn't eat on his last day, it shows how those little things stick in relationships, especially around loss.
Then the source takes a really sharp turn looking at love and sex. It points out what it sees as hypocrisy, religions condemning sex.
While others, like magazines, exploit it. Playboy, Stern are mentioned.
Exactly. And the argument made is that the religious repression actually helps sell those magazines. Forbidden fruit, It creates the market.
And there's a strong contrast drawn between the sexual orgasm and bliss.
Yeah. The orgasm is described as momentary, so fleeting it's gone before you even fully grasp it, which the source suggests leads to addiction, always chasing the next one. Bliss, on the other hand, is described as this continuous showering. Something constant, not peaky.
And that metaphor really drives it home.
Yeah.
Your pleasures were nothing, just signatures made on water, and your pain was engraved on granite.
Powerful, isn't it? Fleeting joys, deep-seated suffering, where we tend to focus.
So what about true love, according to this source?
True love is described as real wild, unmanageable. You can't control it like respect. It's called a cyclone. Something higher takes possession. It happens to you. You're not in the driver's seat.
Which definitely contrasts with being told you should love someone, like love your mother.
Yeah.
The source implies that's often not real love because it's an obligation, not spontaneous.
Right. And it also touches on this idea that a lot of what passes for love might just be operating on the instinctive level, biology, chemistry, a hallucination for procreation.
Interesting that it brings in drug addiction as a contrast, saying addicts often lose interest in sex. Suggests chemistry can override even basic drives.
Yeah, it's a complex view. And then you get that other anecdote, the friend who seemed miserly.
Oh yeah, but secretly bought houses years ahead of time, just anticipating the speaker might visit.
Exactly. That doesn't fit the biological drive model or the manageable affection model. It points to a different kind of connection, maybe. Trust, anticipation, something deeper, perhaps.
Okay, so from these very personal dynamics, the forces then broaden out to critique society, politics, systems. And the view here is pretty unflinching.
It really is. Politics is seen as basically operating on that instinctive level. Might is right, like the law of the jungle.
And it suggests the people drawn to it are often, well, mediocre.
That's the word used. And this isn't just about elections. The source sees these power struggles everywhere. Universities, religious institutions.
Like that anecdote about debating the history PhD who didn't know key ancient Indian thinkers.
Exactly. Vasubandhu, Dharmakirti. The point isn't just the ignorance, it's how chasing status or power within the system can completely overshadow actual knowledge or substance.
And the critique of democracy is particularly strong. Calls it an exploitation of the masses.
And proposes a pretty radical alternative, meritocracy, based on educational qualifications.
For voters and politicians.
Yes. Specific degrees are mentioned: masters, PhDs for candidates, top degrees for ministers. But Crucially, the source says this merit isn't about being superior. It's about having the capacity to serve and share.
That's a key distinction. And this proposed system includes compulsory university institutes, one for deprogramming.
Uh-huh. The aim seems to be stripping away conditioned identities, religion, nationality to get back to being simply a human being.
And the other institute.
For meditation, focused on enjoying emptiness, aloneness, nothingness. And the idea is really out there. You need meditation degrees before your academic ones. Prioritizing inner work, patience.
Wow, that's a fundamental reordering of values. The Force also talks about lives seen as wasted, doesn't it?
Yes. The stamp collector, even with international recognition, is described as wasting life on rubbish. And the professor just keeping an old car, waiting for a driver who never comes, wasting life waiting.
So from this viewpoint, a wasted life is one spent on externals. Validation, stuff, waiting for the right time.
Seems so, instead of engaging with something more, well, essential or present.
The critique hits religious institutions hard too, seeing them tangled up with political power.
Yeah, the example of the Pope blessing both sides in World War II is used to show that entanglement. The source even claims newspapers hold back truths about the Pope because of his worldly influence.
And there's that point about history being written by the winners. Revolution or mutiny depends who's telling the story.
Mm-hmm. And then that almost comical legal story about Sunderlal, the case so complex the judges basically say it can only end if he dies.
It shows how systems can just trap people in their own absurd logic, right?
Exactly. Okay, let's go even deeper now into the source's view on religion specifically. Belief, awareness. This seems central.
It makes this strong distinction between pseudo-religions and authentic religion. What's the difference?
Pseudo-religions, in this view, create guilt, dependency. Confession is given as an example that the priest gets power by holding your secrets. It enslaves you.
Whereas authentic religion is, what? Freedom.
Pure freedom, joy, and it's based entirely on awareness, not rules, not dogma, just being conscious, an inner state.
There's a surprising comment about paganism being a necessary precondition, like you need to be unpolluted first.
Yeah, like being a pure soul, still unpolluted. And that anecdote about stealing the book from the rich kid, it's used to illustrate maybe a different, more primal understanding of right and wrong based on need versus excess before society's rules fully take hold.
That's interesting. And the stance on miracles is very direct.
Categorical. Miracles really do not exist and never happened. The logic offered is that existence can't just forget its own laws. That would be absurd.
So belief in miracles is seen as what? A psychological need.
A need of a sick mind is the phrase used. A desire for power, for intervention from outside the natural order. The Sai Baba story with the boatman is used as an example of how these things might be perceived or rationalized within reality, not as proof of reality breaking its rules.
And the critique goes right to the idea of God and creation, asking the classic question, who created God?
Right. The source points out that religions tend to sidestep that fundamental paradox.
And figures like Jesus, seen as mythologized.
Yes, over time. Meanings and philosophies layered on that the original person probably wasn't aware of. The source is quite blunt. Its loyalty is for the truth, even if that contradicts revered figures.
There's a really important distinction made between accepting yourself and loving yourself. What's the core difference there?
Accepting yourself is seen as kind of passive, maybe even resigned to your conditioning. But loving yourself is presented as this dynamic process that happens through awareness.
So awareness is the key. It does the transforming.
Exactly. You don't try to change, say, hate into love. You just stay aware of the hate, and the awareness itself allows it to transform. The principle given is, whatever you do out of consciousness is right, and whatever you do unconsciously is wrong.
So it's not the action itself, but the state you're in when you do it.
That's the idea, like the Zen master just raising his finger in action from pure consciousness beyond our usual ideas of right and wrong.
And Mahavira's complex categories are mentioned briefly, as a contrast to simpler logic.
Yeah, maybe pointing out that reality is nuanced, not always fitting into easy yes or no boxes, which is what people often want.
The idea of destiny gets a harsh critique too. Ugly reality makes you feel like driftwood.
But then it contrasts that with the Bahubali anecdote, showing immense freedom, choosing enlightenment over a kingdom, suggesting we're not just driftwood.
It all comes back to knowing versus just having ideas, doesn't it?
Seems so. The religious person, in this view, doesn't just believe they know reality directly. Logic is seen as more of a mind game.
Okay, let's shift to some really universal themes. Fear, suffering, death. The sources tackle these head-on,
They do. There are several anecdotes about fear. Monkeys and dogs attacking uniformed people.
suggesting they react to something unnatural or fearful in the uniform itself.
Perhaps. And the strong wrestler, frozen by fear on the rocks, and the atheist teacher who gets spooked by what he thinks is a ghost.
And that ghost story is then linked directly to our thoughts, right?
Powerfully so. Your thoughts are just like ghosts. You simply go on believing in them, never trying to have an encounter. The implication is if you actually turn and face a fearful thought, really look at it.
It might just dissolve, like the ghost did when the teacher confronted it.
That seems to be the idea. And the source even suggests a path to growth. Actively choosing the unknown, the risky, the dangerous, the insecure.
Even though that involves suffering.
Yes, it acknowledges the suffering but implies the growth and maturity and intelligence makes it worthwhile.
And suffering itself is described, like
Huh.
knots.
Yeah, using that Buddha story with Sariputta and the handkerchief, a person in anguish is like a knotted handkerchief. The solution, untying the knots, is simple, but we make it complicated.
And on death. The view is that dying consciously means no clinging.
Right. And if you die consciously, looking back at your life reveals stupidity is the word used. Whether you win or lose makes no difference. That water signature metaphor comes back again.
And there's that observation about the will to live,
Uh-huh.
that affluent people can lose it.
Yeah, particularly mentioned is California wealthy, cultured. The idea is they've had everything they thought they wanted, so what's left to live for? Whereas the poor often desperately want to live because they haven't experienced those things yet.
That's quite a perspective. And the tragic story of the children in the orphanage, dying despite physical care because they lacked that will.
It's a heartbreaking illustration of how vital that inner drive is.
But presence, being in the moment, can apparently cut through even deep suffering. The story of the paralyzed woman.
Yes, whose paralysis just vanished when her house caught fire. The crisis brought her completely into the present moment, forgetting past misery, future fears, and her body responded.
Wow. And this is then linked, controversially perhaps, to conditions like AIDS, seeing the symptoms as connected to a dropping of inner resistance, a loss of that will to live.
It suggests an internal state that external treatments alone might not be able to restore. It's a challenging idea.
Okay, let's loop back to that contrast between doing and being and the source's view on social change revolution versus rebellion.
Right. Doing is generally seen as feeding the ego. The suggestion isn't grand heroic actions, but just doing the small things that are needed. Living simply, ordinarily, but consciously.
And it even flips that saying, seek and ye shall never find, implying the seeking itself gets in the way.
Perhaps. That the state you're looking for isn't found through effortful seeking.
And the distinction between revolution and rebellion seems really key here.
Absolutely. Revolution, the source argues, is flawed because it uses the old system's methods. Violence, power structures. So it just dies into another orthodoxy.
Like Stalin becoming a stronger czar.
Exactly. That example is used. Whereas rebellion,
Individual. Purely personal.
fundamentally individual. And a commune, in this view, isn't a society or organization in the usual sense. It's a communion of individuals who have all rebelled.
And, paradoxically, rebellion within the commune is needed.
To keep its rebellious spirit alive. To stop it hardening into another system.
That anecdote about the lottery winner is striking too. Winning again, knowing it's wrong to keep it, but being unable to stop himself.
Yeah, throwing the keys away. It's such a clear illustration of habit, of unconscious patterns overpowering conscious understanding or will. He knows, but he can't do differently.
And this connects to the examples of Lenin and Gandhi.
Yes, Lenin's violent methods led to Stalin. Gandhi's followers, despite his nonviolence, became violent when they gained power. The source suggests the methods and the inherent nature of the people involved dictate the outcome, regardless of the initial goals.
And there was a brief mention of how even fighting society can lead to corruption, like the son stealing for a movie ticket.
A small example of how opposition can sometimes mire you in the very thing you oppose.
Okay, finally, let's touch on the source's thoughts on paradox, clarity, and the strong emphasis on the individual.
The source uses paradoxes from geometry like Euclid or logic like Bertrand Russell, not just as brain teasers, but to show the limits of the mind, where logic hits a wall when trying to grasp ultimate reality.
And that image of the stream purifying itself, what's that analogy for?
It seems to be about reality or maybe human nature, having this inherent capacity to self-correct, to find its balance if it's just left alone, not interfered with too much.
And this core idea about problems. Life problems are created by your unclarity of vision. That's huge.
It really is, because the implication is that clarity is the solution. You don't first get clear and then solve it. The very act of seeing the problem with total clarity makes it dissolve.
Which connects back to why the Source seems to be seeking individuals, not crowds.
Exactly. Why aren't people listening? Because the message isn't for the mass, but for those few individuals described as so pure, unprejudiced, that they can take it in without distortion.
Like Dionysius the Cynic with Alexander the Great.
A perfect illustration. Alexander stands there, the most powerful man in the world, and Dionysius just says, "Get out of my son." That's presented as the ultimate freedom, completely unconcerned with external power or opinions. A true master.
So the Source is clear this isn't just another philosophy to discuss.
No, it explicitly says it's not a doctrine. It's far more risky. It's about nothing less than death and rebirth, a total inner transformation.
So we've taken quite a journey through these sources from misery to enlightenment. We've touched on rebellion, awareness, sharp critiques of systems, the search for authentic being.
Yeah, our deep dive really tried to unpack these diverse writings for you, pulling out those key insights, those sometimes surprising connections, hopefully helping you see the material from a few different angles.
We hope this exploration has given you some of those aha moments, helping you engage with this really unique perspective you shared with us.
And as we wrap up, maybe here's a thought from the Source itself to leave you with.
If life problems truly are created by our own lack of clear vision, and if seeing the problem clearly is the solution, what might that suggest about how you approach the biggest challenges you're facing right now?
Something to reflect on. Thank you for providing the sources for this deep dive.